Good morning. I am so excited to introduce you to this morning's preacher, Jennifer Schneider. In 2007, Jen graduated from Gordon College with a degree in elementary education in Spanish. But today she joins us, coming all the way from Quito, Ecuador, where she serves as the executive director at For His Children. For His Children is an evangelical residential ministry to homeless children with normal needs and special needs in Ecuador. Jen began serving at For His Children as a volunteer, ultimately fulfilling a lifelong dream of serving orphans in South America. Over the years, she has contributed to the organization in a wide variety of ways, some of which include coordinating the child sponsorship program and creating the internship program. My path crossed with Jen's just a few short months ago in May, when she accepted me as a summer intern last minute. In my few short months of knowing her, I have come to know her warm and welcoming spirit. She is flexible, bubbly, and listens well. She demonstrates exactly what it means to roll with the punches. On top of all that, she graciously answered all of my questions this summer. And if you know me, you know that I ask a lot of questions. As I learned about her story and watched her actions, I was struck by her deep trust in the Lord and by the way she invests in those around her. From the short-term volunteers to the staff at For His Children and the children in their care, she digs deep roots and goes all in. I am confident that what Jen has to say is worth listening to. So without further ado, please join me in giving Jen a very warm welcome.
I feel like I don't have to say anything after that. Thank you. Ecuador is a small country, but with a rich cultural heritage. It's not uncommon as you're walking through the artisan markets to see beautiful tapestries that are hung. And these tapestries are made by the Quechua people, who are the indigenous people group in Ecuador. And this is an art form that is passed from generation to generation. Grandfathers will teach their grandsons from a young age how to weave on the loom. And each tapestry tells a story. It's a way for the family to preserve the history, for a community to preserve its history as well. And each weaver memorizes hundreds of patterns. And I recently had the opportunity to travel high up into the Andes Mountains in Ecuador to a small community where there was a weaver who is 80 years old. The people in the community actually referred to him as Master Weaver. And he's been weaving for most of his life. I got to go into his home and sit alongside him as he was working on his loom. And as I mentioned, there's no physical pattern that he's working off of. He has it memorized in his head. And he confidently was taking each thread and putting that into the loom. And from my perspective, I wasn't quite sure what the final design was going to look like. Not only could I not see a physical pattern, but the way that the weaving happens, the pattern is actually upside down on the loom. And I brought today a tapestry just so you could see a final product here. But as I was praying and thinking about what I could share with you this morning, this idea of God being master weaver kept coming to mind, of how God uses threads, individuals, or situations in our lives to weave a tapestry. With this weaving process, there comes a huge element of trust, as we don't normally have the luxury of seeing the final product. Oftentimes we're only seeing fragments or sections of the tapestry. And Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us to trust in God with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. And as I thought about the stories I was going to share with you this morning, there are threads, Gordon College being one of those threads, that have been woven into my life, and God has used these different people and different experience to bring me to where I am today, which is living and working at a children's home called For His Children in Ecuador. And I want to share with you not only how God has woven in my own life, but also in the ministry of For His Children, how I've seen him use countless threads, countless individual circumstances to weave this beautiful tapestry. So our story begins 30 years ago. And this is just a short video clip to give you a little background of For His Children.
In 1988, we took a 2-week Christian trip to Ecuador, and we brought our 2 children with us. Our son was 8, and our daughter was 5, and that was their first experience living overseas for a short period of time. And the second half of our trip, we husband said he felt this warmth come over him and just this incredible love and opening of his heart toward the Ecuadorian people. And he perceived a voice in his head saying to him, "You will come back here." A moment later, he turned to me and he asked if I had a pencil and paper. And after I gave it to him, after a few minutes, I looked over his shoulder and he was writing things like sell the law practice, sell the cars, sell the airplane. My husband had a lot of toys. Schooling for the children, medical insurance. And I instantly, in my heart, it was like the Lord just kind of opened up the bigger picture and said, something's going on here. The thought that God was pulling us out of our lives there in Northern California and was beginning to show us something out there that he had for us was incredibly exciting to me, and I was on board from the beginning. It was a couple years, probably about a year and a half, that we felt things were finally coming together. During that time, we made more mission trips to Guatemala. We were house parents at an orphanage there run by the Verbo Church, and it was during that time that we saw the blessing that was foster care by loving families, also the blessing that was adoption. It was just beautiful to see this, and we knew that whatever we were going to be doing in Ecuador was going to have something to do with adoption, and that we wanted to be a channel, a way of facilitating these children. We wanted to be part of the adoption opportunity.
So while God was using the Vaughn family as a crucial thread in the formation of For His Children, 30 years ago, I was growing up on Long Island, New York. I was rocking these bangs that are coming up here in this photo. My mom did not really know how to cut in a straight line there. But I had a very vivid imagination. I can remember from a young age being in my backyard playing orphanage, where I'd have imaginary kids that were in need of my help and that I was going to come alongside them and help them. And my imagination brought me to the point of where I even saved a child who was adrift in the ocean, or rather in the pool in my backyard. And I remember from a young age that I was reading books where the protagonist had been orphaned or was not living in a typical family setting. If you remember the Boxcar Children, look at the excitement about the Boxcar Children. 4 children not living with their parents and having to kind of fend for themselves. But those stories really called my attention, and I began even researching orphanages online and wanting to know more about orphan care. And I believe that this was a thread that God was using early on in my life, this desire, this passion to learn more about orphan care around the world. Throughout the Bible, we see how God uses different storylines, different situations to put our trust completely in Him. And oftentimes that's through suffering or through difficult circumstances. This was the case in my own life and also in the ministry of For His Children, especially in the beginning years of the ministry. There were many ups and downs. And this is just one short story of how things started off for His Children.
After arriving in Quito in August of 1990, we began looking for connections with people who worked in Child Protective Services. And so it took about a year and a half of regular volunteer work until finally we received a phone call from one of the orphanages, and they asked us if we'd be willing to take in a very young infant, 6 months old, who was severely malnourished, and the doctor would not allow this little girl to go back to the orphanage environment, but he wanted her to go with the foster family so she could get some individualized care. We were elated. We just saw this as the beginning of the ministry. We drove to the government orphanage and met this little girl, and I remember seeing this tiny, tiny head sticking out of this bundle of blankets. And you could see her cheekbones, and she was sunken in here, and her eyes were very large. I had no idea that I was looking at a child with severe malnutrition. It wasn't until we got her home and unwrapped her and got her ready for a bath that we could see the severity of her malnutrition.
We, of course, immediately had set up an appointment with a pediatrician who then referred us to a neurologist. We were beginning to pour all our love and the energy and the emotions of starting this ministry, we were beginning to pour those into her. But it wasn't meant to be. She became very ill. We didn't know it, but she was developing pneumonia, and she died 3 days later in my husband's arms late one night. And I still can remember that evening calling our pediatrician, taking her up to the emergency room. And it was very traumatic. If this was the start of the ministry, why this? And that was one of the early times that I feel the Lord spoke to me after much prayer and much asking Him for some sort of wisdom, give us some reason why things are going the way they're going. I believe that the words that He impressed on me were, I'm laying a deep foundation for a ministry, and that hurts. I got to dig deep. And He said that's going to be painful at times. And that as startling as it was to hear, nevertheless was comforting, because it gave us hope.
When I was 15 years old, I started having pain in my leg. And after many doctor's visits and exams, I was diagnosed with leukemia and lymphoma. And I went through chemotherapy for 2.5 years and had many side effects from the chemotherapy of losing my hair, weight loss, weight gain, nauseousness. And it was during that time that my perspective shifted, my priorities changed, where no longer was it so important that I got the best grade or that I was so concerned about what my peers thought, or just different social settings that I was in. But I started really understanding what it meant. I said I trusted God, but what did that really mean when things were stripped away, one of those being my health? And it was during that period of time, those 2.5 years, that I really felt like God was speaking to me that He had a plan for my life. And as I mentioned before, the idea of this finished tapestry, where oftentimes we're just seeing that fragment or the piece, I started thinking, what is God's plan for this? What's the purpose? But I can say now, looking back, that God healed me from cancer. I've been in remission for 16 years now. And He used that as a thread in my own story and my tapestry. And I've been able to use that experience to be an encouragement to other people who have had health struggles or who have gone through difficult, challenging times. But it was after that I was healed. I was now a senior in high school, started looking at colleges, and ended up coming to Gordon. I remember looking at the different options and majors that were here at Gordon and thinking, is there an orphanology major? There is not, just in case you were curious about that. But ended up, as Erin mentioned, studying elementary education and Spanish. And my freshman year, I had the chance to get involved with Mexico Outreach. Some of you have potentially gone on that trip to Tijuana. I know it still goes on today. Great. Excellent, lots of excitement. And that was my first exposure to an orphanage setting. And I was able to interact with kids that were, again, not in a typical family setting. They were coming from at-risk situations. And I was able to see just the care that was given to them and what resources were needed to help care. And I had the opportunity to go back a second year, my sophomore year. And during the whole time at Gordon, I was also attending Grace Chapel in Lexington. After graduating Gordon, continued to go to Grace Chapel. I got a teaching job in the area and was living in Beverly. And one Sunday, as I was going to church, I had just graduated, I had no money, and they offered a free lunch, so you can't turn that down. And literally went for the free food. But it was their Mission Sunday or their ministry fair, and they had information about different organizations that they were connected with or supported, and For His Children was one of them. And I picked up a brochure, I looked at the back, and it had the address of Quito, Ecuador. I had had a dream about Quito 2 weeks prior to this. No connection to Ecuador. I probably couldn't even told you where it was on the map. Remember, I didn't do geography or anything like that. But it was one of those things, I put it to the side. I liked my teaching job, liked where I was living. But Ecuador, and then specifically For His Children, kept coming up again and again over the course of a year. I would go to church, we'd have a guest speaker from Ecuador. I'd go out with friends, they'd introduce me to Ecuadorians. I met people who had volunteered at For His Children. I just felt like God was making it so clear and directing me to go serve for a 1-year volunteer time, and that was what I first committed to. Here I am 9 years later. I'm now executive director. And the job, my day-to-day, looks very different from what I thought I would be doing when I was preparing myself to go out into the real world during my time at Gordon. Elementary education, typically you think, okay, classroom setting, being a teacher, being up in front of a group of kids. But that foundation that was laid for both elementary education and Spanish has helped me in my day-to-day work that I'm doing today. It's a unique way of using education as I am able to give workshops and trainings to our staff, and just to be able to make sure our kids are receiving the services that they need in the area of education. And of course, the Spanish I'm using on a day-to-day basis as we speak Spanish in Ecuador. But here are some of the kids that are at For His Children. We work with children who've either been abandoned or have been taken from some sort of at-risk situation. So our goal is to work toward reunification or toward adoption. So reunification would be with the biological parents or family members. And if that's not an option, then we would advocate for adoption. And during the time that they're with us at For His Children, we want to show them God's love and truth in very tangible ways. We work with about 55 kids. We have 2 locations. Here is a photo of our home in Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador. And then we have another location about 2 hours south of Quito in the city of Latacunga. And this is one of the bedrooms at the home in Latacunga. And For His Children has become a model within Ecuador just for the quality of care that the children receive. We've had the government come in and look at different things that we have in place and standardize that amongst other homes. So it's really exciting to be part of this kind of training and work that's happening at other children's homes. We're one of many. And I wanted to share with you this morning a particular story that is really impactful or has impacted my life that involves a staff member, a biological family, and an adoptive family. And to me, it's this idea, again, of going back to the weaving and the threads of how there's so many different connections, not only as we see God weaving in the lives of the kids that are being cared for His children, but also in all these people who come into contact with the ministry. Erin mentioned she came down and interned with us this summer, and she was one of those threads into the ministry. She had an impact on the people that she was working with, the kids and the staff. But this story starts 8 years ago now. I had been down in Ecuador for a year at this point. And our social worker got a call from the local hospital that there was a baby girl who had been born and was in need of our care. The mom had been on drugs, was just not in a good place emotionally, psychologically, to care for her baby. So the social worker asked me if I wanted to come with her to the hospital to meet the little girl and help with that whole process of bringing her back to For His Children. So I go to the hospital and meet this little baby. Scrub up and go into the nursery. And the mom at this point was going through withdrawals. She was still in the hospital, So as I walked out of the nursery, the mom was still there. And she asked if she could hold her baby one more time. And this was an emotional moment. She was aware that we were taking her baby from her and that she wasn't deemed capable of caring for the child. And she held the baby one more time, gave her back to me. And some of you have had this experience maybe with a younger sibling or niece or nephew or a child of that first ride home from the hospital where typically you put the baby safely in an infant carrier. Well, this was not the case in Ecuador. I get in the back of a taxi, no seatbelt. And the driving in Quito in Ecuador is probably similar to driving down 128, I would say. It's a little crazy. And so here we are in the back of the taxi. We arrived to For His Children. And the baby didn't have a name at this time, so the social worker decided to name her after me, and they named her Jennifer. And this was really special for me. I've never had a child named after me before. And I just felt this bond to this little girl. And this is the day that she arrived at For His Children. We take a photo of the baby. There was a collective awe in the front here. That's very sweet. But we take a photo of the child when they first come into the home, and then throughout the time that they're being cared for at For His Children. And one of the things that we find really important is when the child is either reunited with the biological family or adopted, they go with a whole photo album, memory book of all photos from their time with us. And again, those are those threads that we're talking about, those different people that have been in their life that they may be too young to even remember, but God has been using these different people and circumstances. So this is baby Jennifer. We started working with the biological mom and the grandmother with hopes that she would be able to go through rehab and be in a place where she could care for Jennifer. But we just kept seeing again and again that she was not making wise choices and just not showing true signs of change. So in the meantime, while Jennifer was at Forest Children, these are some photos just of her getting older. She's a pretty cute baby. This is her crawling, starting off crawling, and in our baby house there. And the Tias, our caregivers, were giving her all the love and attention that she needed, and we started the process of advocating for adoption as we saw that the mom wasn't going to be capable of caring for her. And 2 years after she was cared for at Forest Children, or 2 years after first coming to Forest Children, Jennifer met her adoptive family. They were a local family, or they are a local family. They live about 10 minutes from Forest Children. And they had been praying for years for children. They couldn't have biological children, and they were just overwhelmed, overthrilled, I don't think that's a word, overwhelmed and thrilled to be able to meet Jennifer. And this is at the goodbye party there. And fast forward now, we're going to go to 2015. We had a new baby that just came into the home, 2 months old. I live on site at the orphanage, and I go down to our baby house, and I was struck by Samuel, was his name, his resemblance to Jennifer. And you could probably see where this story is going, but a few days later, I walk into the baby house, and there, sitting in the baby house, is the same woman who I had taken her baby from 5 years earlier. Margarita is her name, and this is Jennifer and Samuel's mom. And there was something physically different about her. She looked different, and I start talking to her, and it seemed like she didn't quite remember who I was, or there wasn't that sign of recognition. So we start talking, and I find out that she has been off drugs for a period of time, and the one thing that she is needing to be reunited with Samuel is a stable job. So we start talking with our staff, and we were able to offer her a job as a cleaning person at the home, at the orphanage. And in this conversation, found that Margarita had become a Christian and had turned her life over to Christ. And her story, God has used for his children as a thread in her life, as there's been many different support and services offered to her and different people that have come alongside of her. But her life and her story has also been a thread in the lives of countless staff members, volunteers who have interacted with her, as we've seen how God has just been so faithful in her life, how she has decided to trust him even through difficult circumstances. This is Margarita, a photo of her. And Samuel, you can see his resemblance to Jennifer there. And we were able to, in 2016, we celebrated Samuel's first birthday and his reunification with Margarita. She was able to take him home. And we continue to provide services and support to her just to make sure Samuel is in a loving and safe environment and caring environment. But to me, this is a story of redemption and just a story of hope, and just so neat to see how God uses countless individuals to play a part in my own life and in the life of for his children. And as I look out today and think about how God is weaving in your life, maybe it has nothing to do with Forest Children or Ecuador or even a cross-cultural experience, but thinking about the different threads that he's using here during your time at Gordon, whether that be in the academic realm, with friendships that are formed. I just had the chance the last couple days to reconnect and be reunited with 4 of my closest friends who are Gordon grads as well, and we all live in different states, obviously outside of the country. We've continued to stay in touch. We're all very different, but they've all added something into my life and have caused me to grow and encouraged me. But thinking about those different opportunities you have here, maybe it's a service opportunity or trip, but most of all to be trusting God to use these different experiences and these people, and maybe even you and your own life in the life of another student or classmate or friend here at Gordon, because it's pretty incredible to see how that weaving happens, even when we're not seeing the full picture. And I wanted to leave you with this thought. That's Samuel and Margarita. that says, "Our lives are tapestries with stitches being added every day. Sometimes we look around us and all we see are loose threads and knots and holes, and in our discouragement, we can't imagine there's anything meaningful or beautiful being created. But that's just because we're looking up at God's loom. Above, on the other side, he is weaving a perfect tapestry. We just can't always see the beauty of the entire pattern he's creating." So I thank you for your time this morning. I pray that God will continue to encourage you and that you'll be able to fully trust in him and his plan for your life. Thank you. You are dismissed.